Hello and welcome to a live version of And One with Britt Robson, our Men Post Timberwolves correspondent. And we are hours before game three of the NBA second round finals between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets. And I don't know that many people thought that we would be here, with the here being 6-0 in the playoffs, up 2-love against the defending champion Denver Nuggets. And the old adage is always defense wins championships. Well, this Wolves team is living up to that. Britt, talk about the this Timberwolves preseason and what to expect from tonight.
Uh, well, what's incredible is they played the best defensive game I've ever watched in person. I've covered this team for 34 years, and I've seen games. I was a fan of basketball and went to games before the Wolves existed. And what we saw in game two was the defensive player of the year, officially named just this week for the fourth time in his career, Rudy Gobert, out because he was flying back to Minneapolis to attend the birth of his son, Romeo. And the Wolves stepped in the second game in Denver. The reigning champs have the home court advantage. The Wolves had won game one. Game two was just a dismantling of the MVP and his cohorts. It was 61-35 at the half, and it almost wasn't that close. You had people on Twitter, seasoned NBA, retired NBA veterans, saying it was the best defense they'd ever seen. What essentially happened was that because Gobert was out, you asked the players after the game, and they said they realized there was a need, one, to step up for Rudy, and two, that they would have to play a little bit differently, that it wasn't going to be as much rim protection, so they would have to be moving around a lot more, stay on ball pressure a lot more, dive into the gaps a lot more. And as a result, they played with a type of agility and coordination that was a hair different than what they usually do with Gobert. It kind of harkened back to the fly around defense that they began to perfect under Chris Finch 2 years ago when they didn't have Gobert. And they had Cat moving around, Karl Anthony Towns moving around the perimeter more, and guys filling in behind him as the low man and the high wall is what the terms are. But essentially what happened is it was a beautiful culmination of great teamwork and old habits meeting new contingencies, and a team that is really, really peaking right now, just wiping them out, just wiping out a team. They could have called the score. The final score was 106-80. Second time in this playoffs that the Nuggets were held under 100. And now the nation, I mean, Denver was favored. They're the reigning champs. They were favored coming into the series, and they were favored to come out of the Western Conference. And so great was this dismantling that it careened the narrative over to perhaps an overreaction, that a lot of people are thinking now the Wolves are the favorites to come out of the Western Conference and perhaps beat the favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference, the Boston Celtics, in the NBA championships. If the Timberwolves win this series, they will have matched the greatest distance they have gone, matching the 03-04 team that went to the conference finals. And for them not to get there, Denver will have to win 4 of the next 5 games, beginning Friday tonight in Target Center.
So when we're talking about the game that took place most recently with Rudy Gobert out, how does that fly around defense translate to tonight when Rudy's back in uniform? Is there a different scheming, or is it more of the traditional defense, which was already really good?
Right. I think it is more the traditional, and I think that one of the things that made this Timberwolves team great this season, when I did my season preview, the first X factor in this coming season was unlocking two things: the Wolves fly around of 2 years ago with Gobert, learning how to accommodate that, and also having Gobert's traditional rim protection on defense. Gobert is the one that did that for the regular season and most of these playoffs. He is roaming and covering people, switching on to people, following people off the dribble, better than he has ever done, which is why he won his fourth Defensive Player of the Year award this year. And the Wolves are responding by kind of retaining some of the old stuff they had. I think it will be what we saw more in the regular season and in the first 5 games of the series. But I also think what we're seeing now is a team that is supremely confident, but at least if you listen to the interviews in the game, the interim, these few days between game 2 and upcoming game 3, they're not taking anything for granted. They are saying, one game at a time. We know they're the defending champs. They're going to come out and give us our best. They seem to have exactly the right attitude to handle this and to hopefully provide that same fly around motivation while adhering to some of the advantages of having Gobert on the court, which is what they've been able to do prior to the game on game 2.
So talking about defense, but switching the conversation a little bit, you can't talk about this team without talking about the best player on the team and arguably, certainly one of the best players in the league, and some starting to make the argument that he is the player of the league, and that's Anthony Edwards. I think Charles Barkley said during halftime, he called him the best two-way player in the league.
Well, he certainly, first of all, the history of Ant is that he is now in his third postseason. It is the first time in many, many years that the Timberwolves have gone to the postseason 3 years in a row. But in the prior 2, even though the Wolves lost in the first round, both of those series, he played significantly better in the postseason than he did during the regular season. Translation is he's a big game player anyway. What he has done this year is broaden his leap forward. His leap forward now includes some of the things that were flaws of his during the regular season that have not been in these playoffs. And both of them speak to his maturity. It comes on both sides of the ball. One is on offense. He is getting off the ball, meaning when teams are double teaming him or bringing extra players, he's moving the ball quickly and he's getting it to the right people. He's probing first and making dribbles toward them so that he honors their magnetizing toward him and freeing up his teammates. But he is also at the right moments shifting the side of the court with a skip pass, we call it, across to the other end, a teammate in the corner, a guy along the perimeter, or if he sees a seam, he's driving and kicking. So that is the aspect that he's taken a leap forward with on the offensive end. On the defensive end, one of the problems he's chronically had, quite frankly, he's 22 years old, is sustaining his concentration, especially if there isn't a really great challenge in front of him. He's a remarkable on-ball defender when he's up against one of the premier scorers in the NBA. It's been kind of a thrill, frankly, to watch him guard the best offensive players and hold his own. But in the cases of like fighting through screens, watching his man go backdoor on a backdoor cut, sustaining that concentration to prevent that from happening, getting back in transition if the Wolves turn it over or there's a long rebound miss, not complaining to the referees as much and getting back and just kind of shelving those things. These are all things that he has improved on during the playoffs. So you had the old Ant with the mindset that, hey, I come up big in big circumstances. And now you have the new ant, which is the ant that sustains his concentration and also is learning how to be a playmaker, be a facilitator when he isn't the one shooting the ball.
I've noticed in the certainly in this series, for sure, you mentioned the complaining to the refs. That's something that I haven't seen as much, or maybe haven't paid attention to as much. But I don't think I've seen it as much from Ant and Cat. But you know who has been complaining to the refs, and those are the people on the other side. You had the coach, like, and I'm flabbergasted that a technical was not called when the coach literally ran out on the court after a referee. Then you had Jamal Murray. It's no secret that that Jaden McDaniels gets under his skin, and he throws an ice pack or heating pack or something onto the floor. Doesn't get called for a technical, doesn't get suspended, but does get a $100,000 fine.
Right. Uh, Rudy Gobert in Cleveland to referee Scott Foster did this maneuver, like he's getting paid off and got that same $100,000 fine. Jamal Murray did that very briefly the other night, one of these things, but it was unmistakable what he was doing. So right there, that's equivalent. That should be a $100,000 fine. Then you have a situation where he threw a towel behind the referee, that if the referee had taken a big step backward, the referee was out of bounds and the towel never made it onto the court. But if he had stepped back, it would have been a dangerous situation. And then the most egregious thing, what you're talking about, it was during a particularly heated try for rebounds and missed shots when the Wolves were on their offensive end and the Wolves were getting the offensive rebounds. Murray, who had a calf injury during these playoffs and consequently can't move as well as he usually does, he and Jaden McDaniels have a really tough battle under the best of circumstances. McDaniels gives him a lot to worry about. The fact that he is now injured, the fact that McDaniels in particular and the Wolves in general have stymied him and that he's unable to do anything about it because he's not 100%, just made him snap, quite frankly, in that first half. And he threw a heating pad that did make its way onto the court as the players were playing. Fortunately, nobody slipped on it and there was no damage. His teammate, Contavious Caldwell Pope, reached down and threw it off the court as the teams were going back up the court. The referee said they didn't see it. It was kind of a remarkable, they said even if they had seen it, unless he was throwing it directly at somebody, he would not be suspended. Well, I mean, you can imagine what the precedent for that is now, because how do you determine whether somebody is throwing something at somebody? Why don't you just like bowl a marble out there and see what happens? You're not saying it's going toward anybody. I mean, it's just, it's
Like
absurd.
it's like Pat Bev saying he wasn't throwing the ball at the fan, where he just got the 4-game suspension.
Right. So I mean, it's just, I get this. I get the logic of it is that you want the reigning champions to have all their tools to defend their championship. And if you take it away because of this, it kind of cheapens the Timberwolves' achievement, perhaps, or it kind of unfairly denies the Nuggets. So it is this kind of like real basketball thing, as you say, like in real politics. There are rules and then there are things that actually happen. The league does not want to toss the Nuggets' second best player when they're already down 0-2 and essentially seal the series. So it was a ridiculous call, a ridiculous judgment. I tweeted out the other day when the preponderant question after the news comes out is, did the NBA go far enough in only fining Jamal Murray? You know that if that's the question, then the answer is no, they did not go far enough. On the other hand, the Wolves, as I said, they're taking an extremely disciplined and focused take on all this. There's been no whining from the Wolves side. Chris Finch was asked about it after game 2 in Denver and said it was an unnecessary and dangerous thing to do. But nobody is saying we got screwed because Jamal Murray is not suspended. They're saying it's game 3. Let's go.
Yeah, we were talking about Jaden McDaniels, and someone asked Ant about him because in game 1 of this series, 0 points, I think maybe 6 points or so in game 2. But Ant is saying that what he does doesn't show up on the stat sheet.
Right. The place it does show up on the stat sheet is it's called plus minus. It is how many points your team scores versus how many points your team gives up while you're on the court. And right now, in the 6 games that encompasses the 4-game sweep of the Phoenix Suns and the 2 games that they had beaten the Denver Nuggets, Jaden McDaniels is tied with Anthony Edwards as plus 88, which means that the Wolves have outscored those 2 opponents by 88 points in 6 games, which is, to do the math, let me see, 6 and 12, 14 points a game while they're on the court. What makes this fascinating is that Jaden has had his offensive struggles lately. He has not been hitting shots, but the fact that Phoenix, their first opponent, featured 3 just classic, 2 of them are sure Hall of Famers, another one probably will be shooters, and Jaden guarded a couple of them. He guarded both Kevin Durant and primarily Devin Booker, and hounded Booker into a place where Booker kind of lost his mind and was going crazy. Well, now he's doing the same thing to Jamal Murray. So you just get the sense that not only is Jaden McDaniels valuable, but that one of the keys I had for my playoff preview was for the Nuggets was Jaden's temper, whether or not he would be able, because Murray tries to get in his head. Well, as it turns out, the turnabout is what happened. And some of that is to do with Murray's injury, but without a doubt, the frustration in Jamal Murray is causing him to do things that are staining his reputation, are hurting his team, and are just boiled down to a primal, abject frustration. And whenever a defensive player can do that, that is probably the highest honor you could accord them. And now Jaden hasn't done it all by himself. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's been fantastic on Jamal Murray as well. And all the Wolves have actually, quite frankly, played great defense.
That's where I was going next, was the play of both Nah and 2 words Nas Reed.
Yeah, and it's funny because Nickeil Alexander-Walker, or Nah, as everybody calls him, has been a great defender all season long and was a really good defender against Jamal Murray in last year's playoffs when the Wolves played the Denver Nuggets, because Jaden McDaniels was unavailable, because he punched he didn't realize there was a wall behind it, but he punched something, turned out to be a wall behind a tarp that broke his hand, and he was out for the season. Nah was great then, and Nah was great during this season. But now with Jaden back, you have a situation where you can alternate Jaden and Nah on somebody like Booker and somebody like Murray, or you can put them in together if there's more than one wing that you need to stop. Nas, on the other hand, although he's made a lot of great strides on defense this year and has significantly improved that aspect of his game, is primarily known as just a dynamic scorer who can shoot 3-pointers, who's got a great handle, can score off the bounce. His defense was probably the biggest revelation in game 2. Because Gobert was out, he had to be the big, along with Cat, guarding Nikola Jokic, the reigning MVP as we speak, just won his 3rd MVP award. and he was fantastic. There were numerous occasions where he poked the ball away from Jokic, he blocked Jokic's shot, and then he got out in transition. And I would say both Na and Nas are, again, it's hard to order how things are, but in terms of unexpected bonuses, I would say Nas Reed's defense is one of the things that has happened, especially in this Denver series, that is indicating that the Wolves are peaking at the right time and are making some statements that feel repeatable and feel like, not to get ahead of ourselves, but feel like this is a team that can be sustainably very good, if not great.
One of the things that I noticed as a casual fan is during the regular season, there were certain times in a game where it wasn't about a feel. It was like, oh, it's 8 minutes. We got to take so-and-so out or put someone in. With the playoffs, that's out the window, and that's completely changed and shortened the rotation. How's that benefited the Wolves in these playoffs?
Well, I think part of it is the last three things I've written for MinPost have involved chemistry, have involved that you can see it. You can not only see it on the court, but you can see it in the locker room. You can see it in terms of their interaction with each other. And there really is a bond among the top 8 in the rotation, so that when Rudy went down, they did give some minutes to Monte Morris, but the other guy, slow-mo, Kyle Anderson, coming in and doing what he had to do, and discovering that Cat and Nas were doing such a good job, he wound up getting 7 offensive rebounds. In other words, he was able to adjust his game because of that. But there have been numerous games where Kyle Alexander has played 10 minutes or less, so 12 minutes or less. He's had some of his minutes cut. You've had Ant and Cat and Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley all going over 30 minutes. Ant and Cat going over 40 minutes on occasion. And that is kind of typical for the playoffs. But it is interesting to see that you have this roster now that is so taut and so cohesively complementary. And it's because last year they were missing Jaden McDaniels, who, as I mentioned, broke his hand, and Nas Reed, who broke his wrist about 10 days before the start of the playoffs. And so Finch did not have his automatic options. He had to do a little bit more experimenting in what he was doing. Now, if you say that the top 8 are Conley and Ant at the guards, Jaden McDaniels and Cat at the forwards, and Rudy Gobert at center, and then you add in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Nas Reed, and to a lesser extent, Kyle Anderson, there's your top 8. And maybe you do need a Monte Morris at some point in time. They did put him in briefly. But you have, among those 8 players, every single one of those guys has Chris Finch has great confidence in them and isn't afraid to use them. And getting back to the chemistry thing, if somebody is going well, if Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels are just torturing opponents, then Mike Conley gets a few more minutes to sit if he needs to. If you need the playmaking and poise of Mike Conley later in the game, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to sit despite the fact that he's playing fantastic basketball. Nas Reed is often not on the court because Cat is finishing the game. There's an argument to be made that there are times when Nas's skill set fits better, but here in the playoffs and also just in general, you have a situation where Cat is stepping forward and doing what he needs to do. So it's so far, Chris Finch has done everything right, but one could argue that the players are making it so going to be very hard for him to be wrong.
I think one of the things we get caught up in is because Ant is so great right now. So a lot of focus is on Ant, and Nas Reed is the fan favorite. I do think that we are overlooking the contribution of Cat. I mean, it's a quiet 20 that he's putting up every night.
Not only that, I mean, I just got to kind of detailing the things that Ant did wrong. Cat has had a tendency, just quite frankly, to not measure up in big playoff games. He's been the opposite of Ant. Not that he's been chronically bad, but he's been very, very up and down in terms of his past playoff performances. Um, so what has been really heartening and remarkable about this season, especially in this postseason, it was kind of a referendum on Cat. Uh, they have a team good enough now that they're expected to win their first round series, even though they were slight underdogs going into that series. Cat played extremely well. Then you have a situation where Cat is especially important against the Denver Nuggets because they usually have him guard Nikola Jokic and have Rudy Gobert be a lurker, somebody who cuts off Jokic's passing lanes and protects the rim on the weak side. Now all of a sudden you don't have Jokic for game two, and Cat has to do that Jokic assignment while other
Or you
people
don't have Rudy for game two.
you don't have, yes, you don't have Rudy for game two. And so Cat not only did his usual good job on Jokic, but actually upped his on-ball defensive pressure on Jokic and did a more comprehensive job guarding him. And then at the other end, the quickness of his decisions and the correctness of his decisions was really, really heartening. He got the Wolves off to a great start in game two, which is something without Gobert that they needed to establish themselves right away. He's the one that hit the first couple of buckets. He's the one that pretty much played physically and went through traffic to get through some tough baskets. He's the one that caught the ball and didn't hesitate to let fly a three at the top of the key. He's the one, quite frankly, back on game 4 in Phoenix, the clinching game, who played extremely well and had 28 points and rallied the team. So what you have now is you have a situation where Cat is showing consistent positivity in terms of the way he's playing and the way he is playing selflessly. And some of the roots of that come from him being injured for about 18 games in March and being out with it and watching Nas Reed in the lineup in his stead and seeing how Nas Reed moved without the ball, was less selfish, and so on and so forth. And when we asked Cat in Phoenix during one of those games afterwards, he said, he and Finch talked about it. He said he noticed that Nas did these things and that he was going to be more unselfish and he was going to do some other things. And, I mean, it's just, the guy is in his 9th year, and he and Rudy Gobert, as it turns out, have just been mercilessly mocked on social media for years. And it's just very satisfying. As a frequent critic of Cats, I will tell you it's very satisfying to me to watch this guy come through. He just won the NBA Social Awareness Award for producing a film that favored voting rights, and he's done some other things. He talked about it on Thursday in a press conference where his mother was an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and he saw how important it was for her to vote. And he wanted to honor his mother, who died of COVID during the COVID pandemic in 2020, 2021. But he didn't aggrandize these things. He didn't come right. He didn't mention it until it was mentioned to him. He's not insecure about his primacy on this team. And I give Anthony Edwards a lot of credit for that. And I give Karl Anthony Towns a lot of credit for that. As mentioned, Ann is now the best player on the team and is the one getting all the attention. But if Ann is on a podium with someone, I've always said, if I'm going to die, put me on a podium with Anthony Edwards, because I'll be able to hear the eulogy and it'll be marvelous. Ann is wonderfully complimentary towards his teammates. He's also sincere about it. And when Cat hears these words and he knows that Ant keeps saying, Cat, he's vital to the playoffs. If they guard me, that just means Cat gets to go off and everything. This is another part of this chemistry I'm talking about that Anthony Edwards has fostered, and that Cat, to his great credit, has absorbed, figured out where he needed to be humble, figured out where he needed to be decisive, and figured out how to best help his team, and is in the course of doing that right now.
So tonight, the city is truly behind this Timberwolves team, and I'm seeing watch parties pop up left and right. What can we expect from the atmosphere inside the Target Center when the Wolves take the court, and how can that help to fuel the players?
Well, it's kind of remarkable. You'll have a ceremony, very brief, but it'll be a pregame ceremony giving Rudy Gobert his Defensive Player of the Year award. And that's going to make people go crazy because everybody probably in that arena knows that Gobert just had his son born a couple of days ago. So there's all kinds of goodwill from the birth of his child and him selflessly deciding not to go with the team and to be there. Gobert grew up without a father himself and made the decision he wanted to be there for his son on day one. These are the kinds of things that everybody but Minnesotans we're talking right now really appreciate and will give him his props for. Also, he's back in the fold. Also, they're up 2-0. The fans are aware that now suddenly the national narrative is, can anybody beat the Timberwolves? And anybody who knows anything about Minnesota Timberwolves basketball knows it's been 20 years since they'd won a playoff series, and now people are talking championship. They have heard the Wolves be declared underdogs for 2 series in a row now. And I guess what I would say is that there'll be some vindication in this outpouring, but there will also be this we have suffered as a fan base for a long time, and the suffering is over, regardless of where it goes from here. It's silly, and I've written about this too. You need to savor the things that your team is doing as a longtime fan, because those memories are cherishable and they don't go away just because of subsequent events. As they're happening, I mean, there is sitting in Ball Arena in Denver and watching this team reduce the MVP of the league, just recently named as of 48 hours ago, the MVP of the league and the reigning champion team, to rubble after doing kind of the same thing to the Phoenix Suns, albeit not as dramatically. These are things, as I've covered the Wolves a long time. I'm not going to say I'm totally objective about it, but I am a lover of basketball first. These are the things that just give me a thrill to watch. And I think that these are the things that have given the Timberwolves fans an even greater thrill, because they are invested as fans. They do live and die with this team more than I would. And so there will be, in addition to a vindication, there will be a thank you coming out from those fans to the Timberwolves. And I think the only danger is that the Wolves become wanting to return the favor a little too much. Although I got to tell you, the last 2 or 3 days since that win in Denver, they look like a team that is not going to get distracted.
You talk about, so Rudy gets Defensive Player of the Year. You have Ant, who is one of the faces of the league. You have Cat, who's an all-star. and also humanitarian award, the I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Award, and then you have Mike Conley, who wins the NBA Teammate of the Year. This that's a lot of hardware for one team, but also for many years, and rightfully so, the Wolves have been ignored on a national front. This changes the dynamic tremendously, not only for these playoffs, but moving forward.
Absolutely. You've got Rudy Gobert has been in these types of series. Um, he has never been to the conference finals. He has been into a lot of playoff series, and his team has usually faltered at some point in time after the first round. Mike Conley, it's a visceral response to a question about wanting to win, and just basically saying, "This is my 17th season. I'm 37, going to be 37 years old. I don't have many seasons left. I've got to do this. You'll see me. That's why I'm throwing myself around on the court." Um, you've got these narratives, and then you've got these kids, these trio of kids in Jade McDaniels, Naz Reid, and Anthony Edwards, who all kind of came up at the same time and in the same draft, quite frankly, and are all getting paid as a result of what they've done. And there is a brotherhood among them. Jade McDaniels and Naz Reid, for 2 years running, stayed at Target Center during the summer and worked out together. And Ant did that the second year that they did that. And that's one of the reasons you hear Ant heaping all this praise on Jaden. He knows that Nas gets his flowers already. So you have these narratives, and I tweeted this out the other day, but as a reporter covering a team, there are three things you hope for. You hope, first of all, for great players. Secondly, you hope for great interviewers. And thirdly, you hope for great human beings. And if I were to take the top 8 Timberwolves, the guys who play the most, who I interact with the most, who the reporters interact with the most, and you say, how many of those 3 boxes do they check? There would be dramatically more boxes. It would be a landslide vote in terms of this 23-24 Timberwolves team compared to any other I've covered. They are just a great group of human beings. They speak really well. Jaden McDaniels is perhaps one of the only people that is not like an A interview. He's a kind of a quiet guy, doesn't say a lot, extremely competitive, still waters run deep. But you guys got, Mike Conley he puts on a clinic every time he opens his mouth about basketball. Ant, everybody knows, is just like one of the most entertaining and yet at the same time insightful players to interview. Cat is a good interview. Rudy is an extremely thoughtful, straightforward interview. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is another guy who almost seems to open a vein every time you talk to him in the locker room. He tells you exactly what he's going through, what's on his mind. And then you have now the great players. You've got a situation where you've got the synergy that makes a great team, a collection of players that you saw a lot of talent on this team last year, and it was misfiring, and it caused some smug people who never thought that Gobert trade of 2 years ago was ever going to work out. And you had people like me who was kind of on the fence about the trade, slightly in favor of it, turning more cynical toward the trade and beginning to say, I'm not sure this is going to work. All that narrative has been reversed by the quality of their play. And so, it's a great time to be covering and or following the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Well, Britt, I'm going to let you go so that you can get to the arena and continue that great coverage for Men Post. And I didn't introduce myself at the beginning of this video, so let me belatedly introduce myself. My name's Harry Colbert Jr., and I'm the managing editor at Men Post, and have been delighted delighted to work with Britt as an editor of his for the past couple of years, covering this very, very exciting Minnesota Timberwolves team and this, what I'm hoping is a historic season.
Right. I mean, to be honest with you, another uh, 6 wins, and it will be, and then another 10 wins, it will be, it'll be a championship.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And as always, Britt's coverage is on our site, minpost.com, and in our newsletter, and one which you can subscribe to by going to minpost.com and our newsletters tab, subscribe to the and one, where this video will be sent as well. So
And free of charge.
absolutely no paywall. Thank you so much, and go
My pleasure.
Wolves.
My pleasure.